Howdy, folks. Welcome to Saddle and Sixskin, your home for tales of the Old West. Are you ready for a Western story? Before we get started, if you're enjoying these tales, hit that like button. And if you're new around here, consider subscribing to Saddle and Sixskin so you don't miss out on more stories. Now, settle in, grab a cup of coffee, and let's get started. The dust seemed to hang almost suspended in the air as Porter Jenkins, a man hardened by the unforgiving Montana sun, slapped down 2 worn silver dollars on the weathered auction block. The coins made a pitiful, almost apologetic sound against the aged wood, a testament to the meager resources he possessed, practically all he had to his name after a string of hard luck and losing just about everything else. A tense silence gripped the small crowd gathered around him, a silence that felt thick with anticipation. Then, the quiet exploded into raucous laughter as the gravelly voice of the auctioneer boomed out, "Sold. The mail-order bride no one else bid on goes to the fool with $2. It was a cruel, mocking pronouncement, but Porter remained unmoved, his focus unwavering. The year was 1873, and the unforgiving territory of Montana offered little sympathy for those down on their luck. Porter's gaze remained fixed on the young woman standing forlornly on the makeshift platform. Her head was bowed, almost in shame, but even from a distance, he could sense a rigid dignity in her posture that surprised him. He knew he didn't have much to offer her, his ranch was struggling, and his prospects were bleak. But he couldn't shake the feeling that a life with him, however humble, had to be better than whatever fate awaited her if he hadn't stepped forward and made that meager bid. It's a thought that ran through his mind, even now. Do you all agree? At 32, Porter had weathered enough seasons to know that without a little help, he wouldn't be able to make it through another harsh winter. The advertisement for mail-order brides had seemed like a long shot, a desperate gamble in a land where hope was a rare commodity. He hadn't initially planned on bidding at all. He'd simply come to town for supplies, hoping to stretch his dwindling funds a little further. But something about the dejected stance of the final woman presented had tugged at something deep inside him, some sense of decency and compassion that he thought he'd lost somewhere along the way. Before we continue, if you're finding this story as interesting as a worn-out saddle is comfortable, give that like button a tap. And don't forget to subscribe to Saddle and Sixskin for even more tales from the Old West. According to her papers, the woman's name was Penelope Foster. She kept her gaze lowered as Porter approached, her face shadowed by a mixture of fear and resignation. She clutched a small valise to her chest, and it looked almost as worn and weary as the plain brown dress she wore. Her chestnut hair, pulled back in a severe bun, couldn't contain the wisps that escaped around her face, a face smudged with the grime of long and undoubtedly uncomfortable travel. "Miss Foster," Porter said, tipping his worn hat in a gesture of respect. "I'm Porter Jenkins. Even the woman who was purchased for $2. I've got a small place about 10 miles from town. It ain't much, but it's shelter." She finally raised her eyes to meet his, and Porter was struck by their unexpected clarity, deep blue like the mountain lakes he knew so well, and just as cold. The look of her eyes made him wonder, what was her story? "Mr. Jenkins," she replied, her voice surprisingly steady. "I appreciate your intervention. The other offers were less than favorable." Porter nodded, noticing for the first time that there were indeed other men hovering nearby, rough-looking fellows who managed the saloon and brothel at the edge of town, a place that would probably not suit Miss Penelope at all. His jaw tightened at the stark realization of what fate he'd spared her from, even if it was an accident. "Let's get your papers sorted and be on our way before sundown," he said, keeping his voice even and his emotions in check. "Got supplies to pick up, and the trail gets treacherous in the dark." The transaction was completed with little ceremony. The marriage broker, a portly man with tobacco-stained fingers and a greedy glint in his eye, handed over her contract with obvious disinterest. "She's supposed to fetch 50, he complained, his voice a whine. "Boss'll have me high." "Shefetched what the market would bear," Porter replied flatly, meeting Thman's gaze. 50, he complained, his voice a whine. "Boss'll have my hide." She fetched what the market would bear, Porter replied flatly, meeting the man's gaze. 50, he complained, his voice a whine. Boss'll have me hide. She fetched what the market would bear, Porter replied flatly, meeting the man's gaze. 2 was the only bid you got that wasn't looking to put her to work on her back. The broker's face reddened with anger. Now see here, he began, his voice rising in protest. I saw plenty, Porter cut him off with a dismissive wave of his hand. We're done. Outside, Porter loaded his meager supplies onto his rickety wagon while Penelope stood quietly beside it, her valise clutched tightly to her chest like a shield against the world. You can put that in the back, he offered, gesturing towards her bag. She hesitated for a moment, then placed it carefully among his supplies. Mr. Jenkins, she began, her voice steady despite her obvious discomfort. I should inform you that I am not experienced in the ways of marriage, but I am a hard worker, and I can cook and clean. I taught school back east before. She stopped abruptly, as if realizing she'd said too much. Porter paused in his loading, his curiosity piqued. Before what, Miss Foster? She straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin a fraction. Before circumstances required me to seek other arrangements. He nodded, sensing that there was much more to her story, but respecting her right to keep it private, at least for now. Alright, folks, we're halfway through our story. Are you enjoying the drama and the journey these two characters are taking? Well, give that like button a good tap and subscribe to Saddle and Sixkin so you don't miss out on more Western tales. I ain't looking for a wife in anything but name right now, Miss Foster, Porter said, his gaze direct. What I need is help with the ranch. It's just me since my brother passed last year, and I'm falling behind. If you can cook and tend a garden, that'll be more than enough to start. Relief visibly washed over her features, though she maintained her composure. I understand, she replied. Thank you for your candor. The ride to Porter's small ranch was mostly silent, save for the creaking of the wagon wheels and the occasional comment about the passing landscape. Porter pointed out landmarks to help Penelope orient herself to the vast, unfamiliar terrain. The tall, solitary pine that marked the turn off the main trail, the unusual rock formation that resembled a sleeping bear, the winding creek that ran along the edge of the property line. As they crested the final hill, Porter's ranch came into view. It wasn't much, a small, weather-beaten cabin with a lean-to stable, a rickety corral for the horses, and a barn that had clearly seen better days. A few head of cattle grazed in the distance, far fewer than there should have been for a truly viable operation. Home, Porter said simply, pulling the wagon to a stop. Penelope took in the scene with careful, assessing eyes. How many cattle do you have? She asked. Porter answered, surprised by her question. 27, lost nearly half the herd in the winter storms. She nodded thoughtfully. And how many acres? Porter eyed her with newfound curiosity. 160, homesteaded it 5 years ago with my brother. You know something about ranching, Miss Foster, he observed. My father had a small farm in Pennsylvania, she replied. Nothing like this, but I understand the basic principles of animal husbandry and crop rotation. For the first time that day, Porter felt a glimmer of genuine hope flicker within him. Perhaps this arrangement wouldn't be as awkward, and ultimately doomed, as he'd initially feared. The cabin itself was sparse, but it was clean, a testament to Porter's best efforts. Porter had made an effort to tidy up whenever he went to town, never knowing when he might return with supplies, or apparently, a wife. There was one main room with a stone fireplace that would hopefully provide some heat against the harsh winter, a rough-hewn table with 2 mismatched chairs, and a small, rudimentary kitchen area. A single door led to a small bedroom. You'll take the bedroom, Porter said, setting down her valise by the door. I'll bunk out here by the fire. Penelope looked at him with a hint of surprise. Mr. Jenkins, I cannot displace you from your own bed. Porter, he corrected gently. If we're to live together, even just as partners in this venture, you might as well use my given name, and it's no trouble. Been falling asleep by the fire most nights anyway. She nodded slowly, absorbing his words. Then you must call me Penelope. She paused, looking around the humble cabin with a practical eye. Is there water nearby? Well, out back in the creek, about 50 yards down the slope. Good fishing there, too, when there's time. I'll prepare supper, she said, moving towards the small pantry. You must be hungry after the long journey. Porter watched as she began to examine his meager supplies with efficient, capable movements. There was definitely something about her that didn't quite fit the stereotypical image of a desperate mail-order bride. Her speech was educated, her manner composed despite her dire circumstances, and those eyes held secrets and sorrows that made him wonder what circumstances had driven her to such a desperate measure as offering herself as a bride to unknown men in the untamed West. As the sun set over the distant mountains, casting long shadows across the small ranch, Porter found himself with more questions than answers about Penelope Foster. But one thing was certain, for $2, he'd gotten far more than he bargained for. The first week of their unusual arrangement passed in a careful dance of boundaries, polite conversation, and mutual adjustments. Penelope rose before dawn each morning, prepared a simple but hearty breakfast, and had Porter's lunch packed before he headed out to work with the cattle. She spent her days scrubbing the cabin to a shine it probably hadn't seen since it was first built, mending clothes that Porter had long since thrown in a corner to deal with someday, and studying his small collection of books on animal husbandry and ranching, determined to learn everything she could about their new life. Porter returned each evening to find a hot meal waiting, and a living space that had been subtly transformed by her presence. The cabin slowly took on a more hospitable feel, something almost homelike. Wild flowers in a tin can on the table, a colorful quilt sheet unpacked from her valise spread over the back of his worn chair, and the floors swept clean of the ever-present dust. On the 8th day, as Porter was saddling his horse, Penelope approached, wearing a pair of men's trousers she'd obviously altered to fit and one of his old shirts, sleeves rolled up to her elbows. I'd like to come with you today, she said without preamble. To learn the operation. Porter paused, bridle in hand. Miss Penelope, ranching ain't exactly ladies' work. She raised a questioning eyebrow. Neither is starving to death because a ranch fails. You said yourself that you're short-handed, and I'm not afraid of hard work. He studied her for a moment, taking in the determined set of her jaw and the practical way she was dressed. Can you ride? Yes, she replied. Not Western style, but I can stay on a horse. Porter let out an older mare, gentle but still strong, from the corral. This is Maple. She'll treat you fair if you do the same. By midday, Porter had to grudgingly admit that he was impressed. Penelope had a natural way with the animals, a keen eye for detail, and a willingness to learn that was both refreshing and surprising. She spotted a hare hiding in the brush, clearly sick, that Porter might have missed until it was too late. Bloat, she said confidently, examining the distended stomach of the animal. My father's cattle would get it sometimes when they found the clover patch. Together, they managed to ease the hare's discomfort and administer a remedy, a testament to their growing teamwork. As they worked side by side, Porter found himself watching Penelope's hands, strong but feminine, moving with purpose and knowledge. There was something deeply comforting about not being alone with the weight of the ranch anymore. That evening, as they sat at the rough-hewn table eating the stew Penelope had left simmering all day, Porter finally asked the question that had been nagging at him since she'd first revealed her past. Why'd you come out here, Penelope? A woman with your education and skills could have found work back east. Penelope set down her spoon, her eyes fixed on some distant point. For a long moment, Porter thought she wouldn't answer. I taught at a girls' school in Boston, she began quietly. I was good at it, the headmistress was pleased with my work, the students respected me, and I had a small but comfortable life. She took a deep breath, her voice barely above a whisper. The headmaster's son took an interest in me. At first, I was flattered he came from wealth, had connections, seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts on education. Porter remained silent, sensing the dark turn that was coming in her story. He asked me to marry him, and I accepted. 2 weeks before the wedding, I discovered he had made the same proposal to the daughter of a shipping magnate. When I confronted him, he laughed. Said a penniless teacher should be grateful for whatever attention a man of his standing would give her. Her hands tightened around her cup as old anger simmered within her. I broke the engagement, publicly. He spread rumors that I had been improper with him. The school asked for my resignation. No other school would hire me and my reputation was ruined. Porter's jaw clenched at the injustice of it all. So, you came west? She nodded, her gaze still fixed on the distant past. I saw an advertisement for mail-order brides. It seemed my only option as I have no family left. I used the last of my savings for the train ticket. She looked up at him, and a flash of vulnerability crossed her features. I never expected to be auctioned off like cattle, and when no one bid but those men from the saloon, I thought. She stopped, unable to finish the sentence. And then I showed up with my $2, Porter finished softly. Yes. A small smile touched her lips, a genuine spark in her eyes. My knight in worn leather bearing silver dollars instead of armor. Porter felt heat rise to his face, embarrassed by her praise. Weren't nothing noble about it. Just seemed wrong, is all. Nevertheless, I am grateful. She hesitated, her gaze direct. Porter, I want you to know that I intend to earn my keep here. This arrangement may not be what either of us planned, but I believe we can make it work to both our advantages. He nodded, strangely moved by her unwavering determination. I believe that, too, Penelope. That night, as Porter settled into his bedroll by the fire, he found himself thinking about the quiet strength it must have taken for Penelope to leave everything behind and travel across the country to an unknown fate. His admiration for her grew by the minute. As spring turned fully to summer, the rhythms of ranch life settled into a comfortable pattern of partnership and shared responsibility that neither Porter nor Penelope had anticipated. They worked the land together, mended fences side by side, and gradually the small herd began to thrive under their combined care. Porter taught Penelope how to ride Western style, use a lasso, and identify the signs of illness in cattle. She surprised him by being a fair shot with a rifle. Another skill her father had insisted every woman should possess just in case. In the evenings, they would sit on the small porch Porter had built onto the front of the cabin, watching the sunset paint the mountains in breathtaking hues of gold and purple. Sometimes they talked, Porter telling stories of his younger days riding with cattle drives, Penelope sharing fond memories of her teaching days. Other times they simply sat in comfortable silence, the kind of silence that only comes when two people have begun to understand each other beyond words. One evening in late July, as they sat shelling peas from Penelope's thriving garden, Porter noticed how the setting sun caught in her hair, which she had taken to wearing in a simple braid rather than the severe bun of their first meeting. She looked up, catching him watching her, and something electric passed between them, a subtle current of awareness that had been building slowly over the weeks. Porter cleared his throat, suddenly feeling awkward. Town's having a social next Saturday, he said, his gaze averted. Thought you might like to go, meet some of the other women thereabouts. Penelope's hands stilled in her lap. Are you sure? People might talk. Let them talk, Porter said with more force than he intended. You're my wife, on paper at least, and there ain't nothing improper about a man taking his wife to a social. She studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable, then finally nodded. I would like that. Thank you. The town social was held in the newly built schoolhouse, a point of pride for the growing community and a testament to their commitment to the future. Porter felt an unusual nervousness as he drove the wagon toward town, keenly conscious of Penelope beside him in her best dress, a deep blue calico she'd carefully pressed for the occasion. He'd made an effort himself, shaving clean and wearing his one good shirt, the one without a single patch. The schoolhouse was strung with paper lanterns. A small trio of musicians played lively tunes as couples danced and children ran about, their laughter filling the warm summer air. Porter noticed several heads turn as he and Penelope entered, the subtle whispers rippling through the crowd like wind through tall grass. "That's Jenkins, ain't it? The one with that woman. Heard he bought her for $2 when nobody else would bid. A mail-order bride, they say. Wonder what's wrong with her." Porter's jaw tightened, but Penelope laid a gentle hand on his arm, her touch reassuring. "It's all right," she murmured. "I expected as much." Before he could respond, they were approached by a woman with kind eyes and a practical manner. "You must be Mrs. Jenkins," she said warmly, extending her hand. "I'm Sarah Miller, the doctor's wife. We've been hoping you'd come to town and join in at the gathering. We have a ladies' aid society that meets every other Tuesday." Penelope's surprise was evident, but she recovered quickly and returned the woman's warm smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Miller. I'm Penelope. It's a pleasure to meet you. Call me Sarah, please. And this must be your husband. Dr. Miller mentioned treating your brother last year. I'm sorry for your loss." Porter nodded, touched by the woman's simple acknowledgement. "Thank you, madam." More introductions followed, and Porter watched with a mixture of pride and something deeper. As Penelope charmed the townspeople with her quiet intelligence and grace, he couldn't help but notice that she was particularly drawn to the new schoolteacher, a kind, earnest young woman overwhelmed by the prospect of teaching children of all ages in one room. "If you ever need assistance," Penelope offered hesitantly. "I taught for several years back east, before my incident." The young teacher's relief was palpable. "Would you consider coming in once a week? Even just to help with the older students' literature and mathematics would be a tremendous blessing." Penelope glanced at Porter, a silent question in her eyes. He nodded imperceptibly, understanding her need for something that was hers alone. Something that connected her to the woman she had been before the whispers and scorn forced her to run and hide. "I'd be honored," she told the teacher, her voice filled with sincere enthusiasm. Later, as the musician struck up a waltz, Porter surprised himself by holding out his hand to Penelope. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Jenkins?" Her eyes widened slightly, but she placed her hand in his. "I didn't know you danced, Mr. Jenkins." "There's a lot we're still learning about each other," he replied, leading her towards the makeshift dance floor. Porter wasn't a particularly skilled dancer, but years of working with horses had given him a certain natural grace and sense of rhythm. Penelope followed his lead easily, and soon they were moving in harmony among the other couples, their steps blending together effortlessly. Porter was acutely aware of his hand resting lightly at her waist, of the subtle scent of lavender that clung to her hair, of the way her eyes shone in the warm glow of the lanterns. As they danced, he could hear the whispers and comments surrounding them, but the tone had subtly shifted. They moved well together. "She's brought that ranch back from the brink. From what I hear, that $2 seems like Jenkins got himself a bargain after all." The ride home was quiet, but it was a different quality of silence than before, charged with unspoken thoughts and a growing sense of mutual awareness. When they reached the ranch, Porter helped Penelope down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was a lovely evening." "It was," he agreed, suddenly feeling awkward and unsure of himself. "You were a hit with the townspeople." She smiled, her eyes sparkling in the moonlight. "They were very kind, and I look forward to helping at the school." They stood for a long moment in the stillness of the night, something hovering between them that neither was quite ready to acknowledge. Finally, Porter stepped back, breaking the spell. "Better get some rest. Cattle won't wait come morning." As summer faded into fall, the ranch flourished under their combined efforts. The garden Penelope had planted yielded a bountiful harvest of vegetables, which she carefully preserved for the long winter months ahead. Porter's small herd, while still smaller than he would have liked, was healthier and more productive than it had been in years. Together, they repaired the barn roof and reinforced the rickety corral, preparing for the harsh Montana winter that was surely right around the corner. Penelope began riding into town once a week to assist at the school, returning with news, supplies, and occasional small luxuries, a bit of ribbon for her hair, a new book of poetry, coffee beans from the general store. She also joined the Ladies' Aid Society, which met regularly at Sarah Miller's home, and gradually found herself accepted into the community not as the woman Jenkins bought for $2, but as Penelope Foster Jenkins, a respected member of the town in her own right. Porter found himself watching the clock on the days she went to town. An unfamiliar sense of restlessness overtaking him until he heard the familiar sound of Maple's hooves announcing Penelope's safe return. The cabin felt strangely empty without her presence. Her gentle humming as she worked, the comforting aroma of whatever she was cooking for their supper. One crisp October afternoon, as Porter was mending a fence line along the northern edge of the property, he spotted a lone rider approaching, not from the direction of town, but from the vast expanse of open range to the north. He straightened up, his hand moving instinctively to the revolver at his hip. Visitors were rare out this far and not always welcome in these parts. As the rider drew closer, Porter recognized him as James Wilson, a wealthy rancher from 20 miles north with a well-deserved reputation for hard deals and sharp business practices. Porter had avoided doing business with Wilson whenever possible. His shrewd negotiating and unrelenting ambition were a dangerous combination. "Jenkins," Wilson called as he reined his horse to a stop. "Been a while." Porter nodded coolly, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Wilson. What brings you this way?" Wilson dismounted, a tall man with a prosperous belly and cold, calculating eyes. "Heard you got yourself a wife. A mail order one, they say." Porter's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice even. "My personal business ain't yours to discuss, Wilson." Wilson held up his hands in a placating gesture, his smile not reaching his eyes. "No offense, Jenkins, just making conversation." He glanced around the ranch, his gaze lingering on the recent improvements. "Place is looking better than the last time I passed by. Heard you lost nearly half your herd last winter. I hear things are on the up and up." Porter stood his ground, his arms crossed firmly over his chest. "We're managing." Wilson raised a mocking eyebrow. "So, the wife's more than just decoration then?" Porter took a step forward, his anger rising. "State your business, Wilson, and be quick about it. I've got work to do." Wilson's smile widened, revealing a set of stained teeth. "Always direct, Jenkins. I like that about you. I'm here to make you an offer. I'm expanding my operation, looking to acquire more grazing land. Your property would connect nicely with my south pasture, and if you have a partner like the townsfolk speak about you and your wife, I am sure you will like what I offer." "Not interested in selling," Porter said flatly. Wilson shrugged as if expecting this response. "I haven't named a price yet. That's where the fun begins." "Don't matter what price, Wilson. This land isn't for sale." Wilson studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Times are hard, Jenkins, and getting harder. Winter's coming. A smart man knows when to cut his losses and move on. I'll give you a fair price enough to set yourself up somewhere else, maybe back east where your wife comes from." The thought of taking Penelope away from the home she'd helped to build, away from the small community she was slowly becoming a part of, made Porter's decision even easier. "Like I said, Wilson, I'm not interested. Now, if you'll excuse me." Wilson remounted his horse, his smile fading. "Think about it, Jenkins. This offer won't stand forever. A man in your position should carefully consider all of his options." As Wilson rode away, Porter couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that the visit had been more than a simple business proposition. Something about Wilson's manner, the way his eyes had lingered on Penelope and the way his eyes had surveyed the property as if already imagining it as his own left Porter deeply troubled. That evening, when Penelope returned from town, Porter told her about Wilson's unwelcome visit. "He has a well-deserved reputation for getting what he wants," she said thoughtfully, stroking a hair away from her forehead. Dr. Miller mentioned that the Abernathy family sold to him last spring after their well mysteriously went dry. Porter frowned, his jaw clenching. "You think he'd sabotage our water source?" "I think a man who wants your land badly enough might try many tactics." She hesitated, her gaze meeting his. "Porter, if you want to sell, I understand. I don't want us to become trapped here." "I don't," he said firmly, his voice filled with conviction. "This is our home." The word "our" hung in the air between them, its significance not lost on either of them. It was more than just a building. Penelope's eyes softened, and she reached across the table to briefly touch his hand. "Then we'll defend it," she said simply, her voice filled with unwavering resolve. The first snow came early that year, blanketing the small ranch in a pristine layer of white that seemed to amplify the stillness of the Montana countryside. Porter and Penelope had prepared as best they could. The barn was stocked with enough hay to see them through the winter. The root cellar was filled with a bounty of preserved vegetables from Penelope's garden, and the wood pile was stacked high against the cabin wall, a testament to their shared industry. Still, the sudden onset of winter meant Porter spent long hours outside, ensuring that the cattle had access to feed and unfrozen water, battling the elements to protect his livelihood. He returned to the cabin one evening, his face numb from the bitter cold, to find Penelope sitting at the table, an array of papers spread out before her. She looked up as he stamped the snow from his boots and hung his coat by the door. "I've been going through the accounts," she said without preamble. Porter raised an eyebrow, amused and curious. "Didn't know we had accounts to go through." "Exactly the problem," she replied dryly, gesturing to the papers with a flourish. "You've been tracking expenses haphazardly, at best." She smiled and added, "I've organized everything from the past year as best I could from your scattered notes and receipts." He approached the table, surprised by the neat columns of figures and the clear, concise summary she had prepared. "You have a way with numbers. I taught mathematics, remember?" She pointed to a final tally at the bottom of one sheet. "If we sell the 10 steers you've been fattening at current market prices, we'll have enough cash to get through the winter and purchase those breeding heres you mentioned for the spring." Porter sat heavily in the chair across from her, a wave of gratitude washing over him. All his life he'd struggled alone, first to prove himself to his stern father, then to make the ranch work with his brother, and finally, to keep it all going after Thomas died. Having someone beside him now, someone who brought their own skills, perspective, and a relentless work ethic to the challenges they faced was a gift he hadn't even known he needed. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice laced with genuine emotion. Penelope looked up, surprised by the depth of his feelings. "It's just bookkeeping, Porter." "It's more than that," he insisted, reaching across the table to cover her hand with his own. "It's you caring about this place, about," he hesitated, searching for the right words, "about our future here." Her eyes met his, a soft blush spreading across her cheeks. "It is our future, isn't it?" she whispered, her voice filled with tentative hope. "Not just an arrangement anymore." Porter held her gaze, something shifting between them. "Hasn't been just an arrangement for some time now, Penelope." The simple confession hung in the air between them, neither quite ready to take the next step but both acknowledging that something profound had changed, had been changing since that day he'd placed $2 silver on an auction block. The quiet intimacy of the moment was broken by a sharp gust of wind that rattled the windows and sent a shiver through the small cabin. Penelope withdrew her hand gently, breaking the spell. "The storm's picking up. You should get warm. I've made stew." That night, as the blizzard howled outside, Porter lay awake by the fire, thinking of Penelope just beyond the thin bedroom door. He'd come to care for her in ways he hadn't expected, not just as a valuable partner in working the ranch, but as a woman whose strength, grace, and unwavering spirit had awakened feelings he'd thought long buried beneath layers of hardship and disappointment. The question that kept him awake was whether she might feel the same. The winter stretched on, harsh and unforgiving, testing their endurance and their resolve. Porter and Penelope gradually fell into a new routine, confined more often to the cabin by the heavy snow and bitter cold. They spent long evenings reading aloud from Penelope's small collection of books, playing checkers with a set Porter laboriously carved from scraps of wood, or simply talking. Sharing stories, dreams, and the unspoken anxieties that weighed on their hearts. Porter found himself sharing stories he'd never told another soul about his difficult relationship with his father, his youthful dreams for the ranch, his lingering fears after Thomas died that he wouldn't be able to keep the place going alone. Penelope, in turn, spoke more freely of her life before, her idyllic childhood on the Pennsylvania farm. Her fierce determination to get an education, despite her father's initial reluctance, and her genuine joy in teaching young minds. She rarely mentioned the man who had betrayed her, but when she did, Porter noticed that the raw hurt in her voice had lessened, replaced by a quiet, almost wistful dismissiveness that spoke of healing and hard-earned self-respect. One particularly cold night in January, as they sat quietly before the crackling fire, Penelope darning socks with practiced ease while Porter carefully cleaned his revolver, she asked a question that caught him completely off guard. "Have you ever been in love, Porter?" His hand stilled on the weapon as he thought for a minute to bring up a time in his past. "Once, a long time ago," he said. She waited patiently, her needle pausing in its rhythmic movement. Her name was Elizabeth. She was the daughter of a rancher near where I grew up in Texas. We were sweet on each other since we were teenagers. He set the revolver aside, his gaze drifting towards the memories of the past. "I asked her to marry me when I was 20, and she said yes." Penelope's expression was gentle, a mixture of empathy and curiosity. "What happened?" He looked over and replied, "War happened. He joined up with the Confederate Army. Not because he believed deeply in the cause, but because it was something a young man needed to do. By the time he came back a few years later, she had married a banker from Austin." He shrugged with an old pain that was no longer as sharp as it was once. "Can't blame her. Wasn't sure I'd come back at all." "I'm sorry," Penelope said softly, her eyes searching his. "Was a lifetime ago," he replied, forcing a smile. "What about you? Was that man in Boston, was he your first love?" She shook her head, a sad smile touching her lips. "I thought he was at the time, but looking back I was more in love with the idea of him, of stability, of belonging somewhere, of finally being accepted into a certain social circle. I didn't really know him, not truly." She set her darning aside, her gaze direct and unflinching. "I've come to believe that real love must be built on truly knowing someone, seeing their flaws and their strengths and then choosing them anyway." Porter felt a sudden tightness in his chest at her poignant words. "That's a wise way of looking at it," he admitted. Their eyes met across the small space between them, and Porter wondered if she could somehow hear the quickening of his heart. He wondered if she knew that he was coming to know her, her grit, her intelligence, her kindness, her occasional stubbornness, her quiet strength, and that knowing her had only deepened his admiration and respect. Before either of them could speak further, a sudden noise from outside broke the intimate spell of the moment, the distinctive sound of cattle in distress. Porter was on his feet instantly, his hand reaching for his heavy coat. "Stay here," he told Penelope, grabbing his rifle from its place by the fireplace. "Might be wolves." "I'm coming with you," she said firmly, already pulling on her own coat and boots. "You shouldn't go out there alone." Outside, the bitter cold stole their breath as they made their way cautiously towards the cattle pen, a flickering lantern held high against the darkness. The herd was clearly agitated, moving restlessly inside the enclosure. As they drew closer, Porter saw the horrifying truth. The gate to the pen stood wide open, and several cattle had already wandered out into the deep snow. "Someone's opened the gate," Penelope said, her voice tight with anger. Porter nodded grimly, his face hardening. Help me get them back in. If they scatter in this cold, we'll lose them for sure. For the next hour, they worked tirelessly to herd the frightened cattle back into the pen, struggling through treacherous snow drifts and against the animals' natural confusion. By the time they had finally managed to secure the gate with an extra length of rope, both were exhausted and half frozen. Back in the cabin, as they huddled before the fire trying to warm their numbed fingers and toes, Porter's mind worked furiously, piecing together the evidence. This was deliberate, pure and simple, he said finally, his voice grim. Someone wanted our cattle to scatter and die in the cold. Wilson, Penelope said instantly, her expression hardening. He wants you desperate enough to sell him the land, he wants to break us. Porter nodded slowly, agreeing with her assessment. Likely, but he won't succeed. He looked at her, drawing strength from the unwavering determination that shone in her eyes and that matched his own. We've worked too hard. We need to be more vigilant, Penelope agreed, her gaze meeting his with unwavering resolve. We'll take turns keeping watch at night. I'll do it. You need your rest. She shook her head firmly, her chin lifting in defiance. We're partners in this, Porter.